I'm interviewing Skyler Schrempp, author of Three Strikes Summer, a middle grade novel set in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Skyler got her undergrad at Hampshire College and has an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She studied at the Moscow Art Theater School and served as artistic director of the Viola Project, an organization dedicated to empowering youth through the exploration and performance of Shakespeare plays. Skyler was also one of my dearest friends during grammar school in Chicago. Three Strikes Summer is her first novel. Skyler, I'm so happy to connect with you today. Welcome to my Zoom.
Thanks for having me. The cats are going to be part of it too.
That's great. I welcome all animals in the Zoom as well.
Little mutual bathing going on. I hope that's not too risque.
It's all good. Oh my gosh. So your book is geared towards older readers, but I read it aloud to my 7-year-old daughter.
And to younger readers, right?
To younger readers.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, I guess what age group then would you say is your book geared towards?
So the real answer is I don't know. I think books appeal to whoever they appeal to. I know that the publisher has marketed it towards, like, I want to say grades 4 through 7 or like 9 to 12, something like that. So,
got it. Okay.
Publishing and stuff like that, they kind of put you in a little bracket so that they can sell it. I don't necessarily like write anything being like, you know what, this is going to be for this age group or that age group. So
right. Okay. So it's too big for Rosie to read at 7, right? So we read it aloud as a family together, and we were all really hooked on the storyline and what was going to happen. What drew you to this particular time period to write about?
It really, I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily choose like a time period. It's not, it kind of, this is going to sound incredibly pretentious, but I think of stories as kind of like existing in the ether, and they're kind of like radio signals that you pick up. So it's not like, oh, like I'm gonna like go out and look for a 1930s story. It's just kind of like what's kind of there in the air, like, okay, this. So it just kind of happened. When I started writing it, it was a short story. Obviously not a successful short story because now it's a novel, but I was just kind of interested in this like tough kid. And then it just sort of happened that she was on this peach orchard, and I didn't really know much about that whole industry and that whole time period. So I just kind of like wrote a story that was set in the 30s. Was set in the 30s, but also like was not. I had no idea what I was writing about. So it was only after I was like, this is the story, this is the character, that I kind of went back and went, what does it actually mean to write about the 30s? What was going on? And then that world kind of got a lot more fleshed out.
Oh, that's interesting, because I feel like there are certain people who might, everything is like planned out before, right? And you're saying it's a little more fluid for you. You were kind of worked through it as you were writing.
Yeah. So a lot of writers will either describe themselves as pantsers or plotters. So like if you're a plotter, you plot everything out and you decide what you're writing about. And if you're a pantser, you're writing by the seat of your pants. You're making it up. And I actually am not a fan of either of those terms. I like, I heard George R.R. Martin in an interview one time describe writers as either architects or gardeners. So like an architect draws up a plan, right? But a gardener kind of just starts planting things, and you might have an idea of what you want your garden to look like, but ultimately you'll realize like, oh, this thing that I thought would grow here isn't growing, but these things that I had no plan on really spending a lot of time on are like flourishing. So I'm a little bit more like that. Like I try a bunch of different things and then kind of follow, what feels right and what feels fruitful. And my mom's opening the door again. Closing again.
It's so good. Okay, I really like that. See, I learned something new already. Architects and gardeners. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more it gives a little bit more credit to the people that are less structured, right? Because like pantser makes it sound like you're like, I don't know, like whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not at all what it's like, right? You're like, I have a sense of what I want to happen, but I don't really know how to get there or what I need to make happen to achieve that plot point or that moment or, whatever it may be.
Got it. Cool. So this next question is from Rosie.
Okay.
She's at tennis camp right now.
Oh, yeah.
It may link into your last answer. How did you make up the story and how did you make it make sense?
Okay. That's a really great question because the plot is really complicated and making story work is really complicated. How I made up the story was I knew a couple things had to happen. I knew it was about a girl that really wanted to be a baseball player who wanted to be a pitcher. So I knew I had that. But then like you can't read a story about like a girl who wants to be a baseball player just kind of sitting around and hanging out. Like that's not anything that anyone's interested in reading, right? Something has to happen. So then it's a matter of like, well, what can I make happen to my character and what can I make my character do to make other things happen to, create a story. And, in terms of like actual story structure, I mean, there are not formulas, but there's patterns that we've come to expect in stories. Like we all know that there's going to be like some kind of big climax, something big is going to happen. So if Gloria is a baseball player, like that climax probably should have to do, it should probably be a baseball game, right? And we know that like we have to set a story up. We know we have to like watch the character go through some things. So it's really just like, let's have this kid. Let's see her kind of decide to follow her desire, see things get in the way of her desire, and then. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, you want kind of like a story to be driven by your main character's desire line. Like, what is the thing they want, and how are they going to get it? And then, as an author, you kind of have to make it as hard as possible for them to get. Because if Gloria just gets on the team in the first chapter, there's no book, right? We want to watch them fail and make mistakes, and then ultimately be successful or not be successful, depending on what kind of story you're telling.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that I'm inferring from Rosie's comment question that it made sense. So that's good.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, yeah. But
That's
ultimately, like it's a bit also like, crocheting something, you kind of realize there's a hole back here and you have to go back through and kind of patch it up or make it connect to something, later on in the book so that it's not like a random hole in your
Yeah.
story.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I will
I've never read a book where you're like, there was like a whole storyline that the author just dropped and like nothing happened. And, and usually it's because someone didn't go back through and figure out how it could connect or if it needed to get cut or anything like that.
for sure. Well, yes, we all thought that you did an excellent job weaving everything together, and I will pass on your answer to her.
Okay. Hope it makes sense, but
No,
yeah.
for sure. Okay, so chapter 19 is a particularly touching chapter. In the scene you set, Gloria, the daughter, is being tended to by her mother after a brawl on the baseball field. Excuse me. In this scene, you make the distinction between honor and pride and demonstrate that parents have feelings too, even though we don't always show them.
Yeah.
Is it important for you to impart wisdom and meaning in your writing, like a moral? I just felt like that chapter was really beautiful and special. It's just the one scene where there's no activity. They don't, they're just sitting and talking and taking care of each other. And it was very touching. So just tell me about that.
Yeah, so I think to answer the question, like, no, I don't go in writing like I want to deliver some kind of lesson or I want to impart some great truth. Although I've heard from several people about that chapter,
Really?
kind of appreciated, let that the main character kind of realizes that her parents are going through something as well.
Yeah.
It came from really a character driven place, right? Like we have this moment where Gloria really f's up, which I want to talk to you about because I think you're the first person I've talked to about this book that actually might have some insight to a key part of this book because of when we were in school together,
Okay.
which is a whole other thing. But there's this kind of big explosive moment of violence, and so again, going with how do stories make sense, you can deal with that a couple ways. You can like cut forward in time and be like, and we made up and it was fine. Or you can say like, no, like we need to see that happen. Like that's part of the story. So I knew that we needed to see that happen. We needed to see her kind of recover from that and grow.
Mhm.
And in terms of the mom character, I had a lot of guilt about the mom character because Pa is the dad is kind of Gloria's hero and has a very major role in Gloria's story, and she's really interested in making him proud, and she's really interested in his trajectory, and she spends very little time really thinking about her mom beyond kind of blaming her for things that go wrong. And the best stories let all of their side characters and supporting characters have full arcs and be full humans. And so it was kind of this opportunity to let Ma be a real character with real issues and real desires, and kind of shed light onto her state of mind at the beginning of the book. For people that haven't read the book, Gloria is very upset that her mother seems to just take everything in stride when they lose the land and they have to leave, and like, why aren't people fighting? And Ma kind of very late in the book is like, here's why I didn't want to fight, and it's a very good reason.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think the best books don't necessarily set themselves up with an agenda for things they want to show or teach, but have kind of a question they're exploring, which ultimately can end up teaching or showing those things anyway, right? But I think if I had gone into that scene thinking like, it's important that kids know that their parents go through crap too,
Yeah.
it would have been a different scene, and it probably wouldn't have had an effect on you. It would have felt like blah, 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 after school special, here we go.
Sure. Contrived. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. Or
Yeah.
just like, what's that word? Such a simple word, cliche.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you did a really good job. It was a beautiful thing to read. So,
Thanks.
okay, you have a very vivid way of describing things and emotions. I found a couple analogies. So, the peace in the room was as fine and delicate as a spider's web. Another one is, it was soft and gentle and still, like when you let yourself sink to the bottom of a pond. The men with clipboards were as jumpy as cats in a room of rocking chairs. How did you find your voice as a writer, and how do you come up with those descriptions? Are there moments where you think of them and you just write them down? I mean, like the image of, quiet and still, like when you let yourself sink to the bottom of a pond is like, just, I mean, it's wonderful because that's such a specific, evocative thing to say. So tell me about that.
So the quick answer is I don't know, and the second answer is I read the audiobook for this, and as I was reading it, I discovered that all those similes that you chose.
Yes.
There are 17 that are just about cats. Like you just did one of them, right? Jumpy as cats.
Really? Yes.
I read that, like, what does this mean? That like I'm comparing everything to cats. Cats are like bounding around me. I don't know. And in fact, honestly, at this point, I sort of feel like the simile is a bit of a crutch for me. Like
Okay.
it's sort of the tool that I rely on the most heavily. I don't know why. It comes from a place of, as a writer, there are a lot of cliche and tropey ways, especially of describing emotion, right? Her heart caught in her chest. My stomach turned, I had butterflies in my stomach.
Sure.
And I was lucky enough to have a lot of teachers that looked at this manuscript early on that caught every one of those and was like, nope, you can't say this ever. Like, no, tears are not always springing to people's eyes. No, this, that. So then it becomes like a lot of it is about limitation. Like, well, you took away all the easiest ways for me to describe, it's silent as the grave. It's, you know, all the easy ways that we have, the language that we have kind of stored in our head that we can just pull from all the time. Most of that is tired and old language. Like we don't
Sure.
necessarily want to spend 300 pages reading about people's, you know, butterflies in their stomach. I mean, you can, you know, but what makes something beautiful is to hear it in a new way,
Sure.
to hear what love feels like, not by describing butterflies in the stomach. And I had a teacher who, she gave me this like sheet of ways authors have described internal kind of emotion that was so beautiful. And she had an example of Zora Neale Hurston from Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I can't remember the name character's name, but she talks about there being a teacup in her chest,
Yeah.
and like the first time her husband hits her, like that teacup falls over and breaks.
Uh-huh.
And it's like a devastating thing to think about, right? I mean, it hurt. It's like it's a horrible grief-stricken thing, like this little teacup in her chest that just
Right.
shatters for something
Sure.
that's never going to go back, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like as a writer, like yes, I'm looking for different ways of saying the same things we've felt for millennia.
Yeah.
Um, and that tends to come out in simile, and more often than not in similes of cats, apparently.
Cats. Yeah.
The thing I'm working on right now, birds are coming up a lot. Like
Okay.
there's lots of like, you know, her eyes were sharp as hawks, and you know, birds of prey kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just it's a tool that's very comfortable for me that I use a lot, and I'm actually right now trying to explore some other ways of doing things um, that are not purely poetic descriptions.
Yeah.
I recently read The Magpie Murders, which was so much fun, and it's so much fun. And the narrator describes like they're it's in London, and her husband's just been to Crete or Greece or something and has brought back a bottle of wine from the area, and she says it tasted like all foreign beverages taste when they've been through Heathrow. Wrong. And I was like, oh, like there's no simile there, but I know exactly what you're talking about. The thing that you think is so exciting while you're somewhere in a distant land, you bring it home and you're like, yeah, this was really better when I was like on the beach at the sunset. And now
Yes.
it's like sweet wine and I don't,
Yeah.
you know,
Totally. Out of context, it's not the same thing.
right, exactly. But it was such a
Uh-huh.
great way of like that's a totally different way of writing. And like that book didn't have very many similes at all, but it had these really little it was filled with observations, I guess,
Yeah.
that were just really astute and witty and just spot on. And I was like, I love this, you know,
Yeah.
like I wish I could write like this. I can't yet. I'm trying to
Yeah.
try it out. But
Yeah. So tell me what you are working on right now. Are you doing another book?
yeah, so I'm working it's really causing me a lot of anxiety this week. I'm working on a gothic mystery romance kind of thing.
Okay.
So it's like it's for an older audience. So like our narrator is 18, and it's like, you know, girl from the city. It's like 1840s England.
Okay.
Through no fault of her own, is kind of cast out of society and has to make a choice to either do something she really doesn't want to do to kind of pay back the debtors, or like run away and escape and forge her own path, which of course she does, because we want to watch characters like walk into danger and have adventures, right? So she like, you know, ends up going to this northern part of the country and finding employment at this really scary old house where like the mistress is very ill,
Mhm.
but like something's wrong. Like, you know, when she knocks on the door, like the housekeeper is clearly extremely on edge about someone coming in the middle of the night. And is there a ghost? Is there not a ghost? And the mistress dies very suddenly and early on in the book, leaving the, you know, young, handsome husband suddenly unattached. And then it's kind of like, was this a murder? I'm gonna solve it, and then uncovering all these other things about the family and the house. And so it's been a lot of like, it's kind of like Jane Eyre meets Rebecca meets BBC mystery.
I
kind
love
of.
all of these things.
It's like a very wintry, cold weather book.
Got it.
And it's got like that really kind of Victorian voice. And yeah, it's the bane of my existence right now. And I just, I've been working on it for a long time, and I'm really ready to have my kind of aha moment with it. But
Yeah.
this is the first thing I'm writing out of grad school where I don't have the constant feedback that I had while I was in grad school and writing Three Strike Summer.
Okay.
So I finally like reached out to a couple other writers and I was like, can you just read what I have and just, I just need somebody else to see this and tell me if this is terrible or exciting but confusing or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I've been listening to like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre on audiobook and just kind of living in this sort of spooky, wild, changeling-esque kind of world.
Uh-huh.
So
Cool. Well, that sounds exciting. I can't
yeah.
wait to read it when it's out. So
Uh-huh.
this book, Three Strike Summer, this was a grad school project.
Yeah, I started it in grad school. I
Okay.
technically finished the first draft in grad school.
Okay.
But when your first draft is never exactly what ends up in the actual book.
Sure.
Lots of changes. But yeah, it was born. I think I started it my first semester and then finished it by the end of my last semester.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Okay. Cool. It's hard to know or understand the era you live in without the benefit of time or hindsight. When we look back at ourselves now, what do you think we will see? How do you think history will judge us?
Like us right now, you and me.
Societally, I think. Like when we look, because you love different periods of history,
Yeah.
you're always looking back in
Mhm.
through the lens of a different time.
Yeah.
If you were to write about our time 200 years from now, or what
Mhm.
100 years from now, what would what does that look like?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think in terms of like how would people judge us, I think that I know that people will be very unforgiving about our inaction on the climate crisis. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I think that is our generation's like slavery. That's going to be a thing where people are like, how did you ever think that not that this was okay? I don't think people will understand. I think they will be like, I can't, like, you had all the information, you knew what were you doing? And I think that we will be judged very harshly for that.
Yeah.
um I also think like the tricky thing about looking back on history is that we don't early on writing this book, one of my advisors, brilliant lady, who gave me a piece of writing advice that I didn't take because it was a bad piece of writing advice. She was like, I can't really tell, like, I need to feel like this is more 30s. Maybe you should have like President Roosevelt go on the radio or something. And I was like, oh
Yeah.
no, like I think we tend to look back at history and kind of have this sort of history textbook idea about what was actually going on, when really like it's in those really tiny little everyday moments that are it makes up who we are and what our time is, but in these small conversations. um so in terms of like looking back on this, I like the idea that 200 years from now someone will be like, I just want to know what it would have been like to have sat in the room when people were still zooming with each other. Like,
Yeah.
I want to be a fly on the wall and have
Uh-huh.
like how did they set it up and like what did they talk about? Because presumably 200 years from now people will have a whole new way of
Yeah.
interacting with each other.
They'll be like hologramming into each other's living rooms, and you'll just
Yeah.
be zoomed into my or like lasered onto into my kitchen, table or something.
Yeah, and I think, the really kind of alarming thing is that there's stuff happening right now that we don't know is historically significant. So, there's things happening right now that could be the start of some totally different political movement or some totally different arts movement that we don't even realize is a thing right now. Like that book you read last year is one day going to be remembered as like the seed that sparked this massive artistic renaissance where writers started doing this new thing. And there's no way for us to know that, and that's kind of a good thing, right? Like it's good to kind of just be in the moment. But yeah, I don't know. When I'm looking back at history, I am interested in those weird everyday moments that don't feel historical.
Yeah.
Like everyone wants to find like a journal of like December 7th, 1941. You wouldn't believe what happened today. Like the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor,
Right.
Everyone's like interested in that. And I'm like interested in like, some housewife living in Hawaii that's like writing down her recipes and being like, da da da, da substituting this because I've got this ration book and da 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 da. That mundane kind of everyday thing is, I think, what's really kind of exciting about history and wonderful. And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. Yeah. Just the general texture of life, not the big aha moments that maybe go down in history books, like to your point. You don't want to bring,
I'm never gonna like write a book set on the night the Titanic sank, I mean, never say never, but like
you're like, now that I said it out loud, that's my next
like
one.
like there's they talk about snapshot moments, right? Everybody remembers where they were on September 11th. Everybody remembers where they were when JFK was shot. Like it's a snapshot of your life. All of us, if you were alive during the thing, exactly where you were, how you heard the news, the date these kind of major things happened. And I'm interested in the kind of unknowns, and just how everyday people live their lives. We tend to know a lot about rich people, royalty, major movers and shakers, when I'm like, I want to know what kind of games like the little kids that went into coal mines 100 years ago played with each other when they came out, stuff like that, where I'm like, where's that piece of information? And I think there's more historians more today are looking at those things. And Studs Terkel collected amazing records of just this thing, through living, interviewing living people that could remember, and I think there's more of an eye towards the history of everyday people versus like Winston Churchill signed a thing and that thing had major implications for these people. But it's like, I don't know. It's like the little things that I
for sure, the nuance. Yeah. I wonder if this is one of the reasons that I keep like paper planners still, even though that makes me feel extremely outdated, but I don't have a journal. I mean, I remember you were you've always been writing and journaling and poetry and all those things. I don't keep a journal, but I do keep paper planners because for me, I feel like in the digitization of everything, if I die tomorrow, my husband like may not get into my phone, like he may, because it's fingerprint, right? Like all of my, all of those notes, right? Messages, pictures, those are all kind of lost. So I'm just thinking out loud, adding commentary to what you said, but I just wonder if in, this landscape where everything is digitized, we're losing some of that record. Like, how are people going to look back on our records?
I don't know, because in one respect, digitizing everything makes it super available. Like you could go online right now and find a recorded voice of someone in Appalachia in 1917. You could just go online and find that, which is incredible. But I do think we're approaching kind of like a black hole. Like years in the future, there's going to be this weird black hole of like stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of upset. I don't keep a journal anymore because my writing time is spent writing. Like I don't self-reflect, which is maybe a bad thing. But I do think that I don't know how that's all going to pan out. Like
Yeah.
I have anxiety right now because I haven't put photographs, not that they would even be actual photographs, but I haven't put all the pictures of my daughter in a album that's
Yeah.
physical. That's a thing that I could hand someone and we can look through it.
Right.
This keeps me up at night. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, you gotta like, you know, somewhere on this phone and somewhere on your hard drive and somewhere in a text that someone sent me. And I'm like, there's no thing. I don't
Yeah.
have any physical thing of my kid. And I'm sure you had, I mean, I had like I have the photo album of me when I was a baby in the first year of my life. You know, that was a
Right.
pretty common thing for people to put that together. And that's non-existent right now.
For sure.
So,
Totally. This is a great segue to this next question, which relates technology to reading. So my question is, the advent of technology has changed the landscape of reading.
yeah.
Do you see children and adults reading less now? Or to your earlier point, has digitization increased access? What scares you or excites you the most about the intersection between the digital world and the act of reading?
Wow. I I have, so in terms of like the choice, I'm going to sit down and read something. I like to think that that's a sort of constant. Like people will read things. Now, maybe they're reading a physical book, maybe they're reading a Kindle, maybe they're reading articles online, but they'll read something. What I am aware of that has really changed is the types and formats of what, especially young people,
Yep.
read. So,
Mhm.
like, I've heard a lot of talk about, you know, having things exist in these really small, kind of bite sized little vignette sort of like TikTok, Twitter sort of morsels.
Yep.
And I think that is a direct, you know, if you're used to that kind of format, then that's going to be the format that you seek out. In the same way, like, and there's an ebb and a flow to it, right? Like, there was in my early life, we went to the movies, right? And we sat down and you watch a movie for anywhere from 90 minutes to 2.5 hours in most cases. Now people will sit down and watch 10 hours of TV in one sitting. Like you get used to certain formats.
Mhm.
And there does seem to be something happening right now where people want pithier, shorter, whatever. I don't know if this is a secret, but I have a friend that's working on something which I think is really interesting. It's essentially a story, it is a story that unfolds on your phone in real time of text, like you're overseeing texts between friends.
Uh-huh.
So there might be a little like 10 minutes of constant texting. So you might pull up your phone and be like, oh my God, I have 24. What the hell happened? And
Yeah.
then maybe nothing, and it's all laid out like maybe nothing happens for a long time. And then in the middle of the night, you get the answer to a question that was brought up here, but it's narrative, it's fiction.
Yeah.
But
Oh
it
my
would
gosh.
show up on your phone, like
Yeah.
as though you're a
So
voyeur.
it's just a story through two characters texting.
Exactly. So it's
What?
like
Oh my gosh.
you're overhearing.
Yeah.
Like if you were in a restaurant, you were overhearing, but it's happening in real time. So it's not like you get all the texts at once. Like
Yeah.
the story, and I think the way she's doing it, you can choose the duration of your story. Like I want a story that happens over a day. I want a
Mhm.
story that happens over a month. I want a story, and I'm like, this is so amazing.
That's insane. I feel
And
like
I
that's
actually think
amazing.
I think that that's actually a really cool new way of telling stories. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you're checking your phone, like, is anything going to happen? Is anything going to happen? You know? Oh, there's a new text between, you know, Josie and Samuel or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I know she's talking to a lot of playwrights about writing these because, you know, playwrights deal in dialogue. Um, so do I sometimes fear that like the novel is in danger? Not really, because I think it'll just always be there. I mean, in the same way, I don't think TV will kill theater. Theater will just always be there. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
some dope is still going to be making these things, and some other dopes are still going to be reading these things because we're curmudgeonly or something. I don't know. Um, it's a good system. It'll continue, but I do think that our reading habits have changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that I really struggle to read words on a page.
Mhm.
I have to listen to them now, and a lot of that has to do with just the craziness of my own life, where like I don't have half an hour of uninterrupted solace to sit down and like dive into a book. I
Mhm.
have to listen to it while I'm doing other things.
Mhm.
But I think also part of that is just my attention has changed.
Mhm.
I'm listening to Jane Eyre right now, and it's wonderful. I don't know that I have the stamina to sit down and read Jane Eyre right now, even though
Mhm.
I read it as a 14-year-old and loved it and whatever.
Yeah.
Our brains are changing, I think, a little bit.
Our brains are, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a
Exactly.
little scary, but I don't know.
Right. What is the most critical thing you want to impart to young readers, particularly young female readers?
Oh man. Um, That's kind of a loaded question right now because there's a lot of book banning happening right now.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think the main message I would want to impart to young readers, every young reader, is just that you deserve to read books, the books that you want, and you deserve to see people like yourself in those books. Um, Listen, do we identify with characters that have different color skins than us, different jobs, different genders? Yes, of course. Like, right? Like reading is like an act of empathy and imagining yourself in someone else's shoes. But it is also important to be able to pick up narratives and be like, this kid is like me.
Mhm.
Um, Whether it's, a story about a kid who has anxiety and you have anxiety, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, like there's a story about a kid like me. Kids just deserve to read books that they want to read, and books that star them. And I think that is really shockingly up for debate right now. Um, Shockingly, I literally, I'm a little bit in disbelief. Like some of the headlines are so shocking to me that I'm like, that can't possibly be true. This must be a satire, and it's not.
Yeah.
So, and I think, in terms of like girls, I think I really struggled with, and this relates to seeing yourself in a book. Anyway, it's really the same answer to the same question, but I really struggled as a kid feeling like I was too loud, I was annoying, I wasn't easy, and I guess I guess what I'm saying is like I hope that I guess I hope that girls feel, I think this is I think it really has changed. I really don't think, in many ways, like authors are writing for themselves as children, and like the children have already advanced. So
Mhm.
like I'm writing for a child in a lot of ways that was, reading it in 1992. Um, I don't know, but I would hope that when girls in particular pick up my book, that they feel like there is power and benefit to speaking your mind. And sometimes you get burned, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
the wrong thing comes out, but it's important to speak up, and it'll make some people uncomfortable, and it'll make some people not like you. But, you know, being yourself is more important than being polite and fitting into somebody else's box,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, it's beautiful. Answer boldly, as
Oh,
you said
yeah, answer
earlier.
boldly. Yes.
Answer boldly.
Yeah.
My last question is a fun one. And I'm really excited to hear your answer because of your breadth of historical knowledge. If you could invite any four or 5, whoever, people to a dinner party, living or dead, who would you invite?
Oh my gosh. This is gonna be such an obvious answer. Definitely Emily Bronte. I just want to actually, I don't want to invite her to dinner. I want to show up at her house,
Okay.
cook dinner for her,
Okay.
so she can get some writing done. But um, and this a lot of this is because of where I'm at and what I'm working on. But like Emily Bronte, Charlotte's on my B list right now.
Okay.
She might there might be room for her, but Emily for sure.
Okay.
Emily Dickinson
Okay.
this is another place. Like I just want to watch them. I just want to watch them interact. They don't have to talk to me. Okay, so then for sure. Who else? Oh my gosh. I mean, sure, I'd love to meet Joan of Arc, but I also feel like that would be a very uncomfortable and weird interaction. I feel like we wouldn't get a lot out of each other as people.
Yeah.
It's okay. She can remain a saint and kind of far away and on a pedestal, and I'm okay with that.
Got it.
And then who else? I mean, those are the two big ones that come to mind like immediately. I'm like Emily Dickinson, Emily Bronte. I'm sure there are others, but those are like the. I mean, there's certain there's there's certain historical mysteries that I would love to parse out. Like I would love to have, you know, Mercy Lewis, who was a teenage accuser at the Salem witch trials. I would love to get her as a grown woman, like after the fact, and just be like, lay this all out for me. Like, what was going on with you? Any of those girls, because after that happened, the witch trials are another like period that like I've always really wanted to write about. I shouldn't write about it, but that really got swept under the rug after it happened, and there were a couple women that, as a grown women, kind of asked for forgiveness or like repented or said like, I'm really sorry about that. But like in true kind of New England puritanical fashion, it was just kind of like, let's just move on, let's just move on with our lives. So yeah, I would just love to, no judgment. Like, I'm not going to judge you. Like, please just tell me what was going on in your mind. Like, what were you feeling when those things were coming out of your mouth that you said with such conviction? And how did it feel? Literally, how did it feel to watch people die at your word? That is, I mean, something I'm very curious about.
This person's name was Mercy Lewis. Is that
Mercy
right?
Lewis, yeah. She was
an ironic name for that person.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she was probably, I think, 16 when that happened. Most of the girls that were accusing were like refugees from the wars between like the indigenous people and the English. So like they had like they were fleeing all this like really scary bloodshed. And there's a lot of scholars that kind of think of the Salem witch trial as like kind of trauma enacting itself upon someone else.
I see. Yes.
So, these girls were, a lot of them were orphans, had been orphaned by these things. And I mean, there is something there. There's just something that I don't think anyone's really ever been able to, you can look at it from a bunch of different angles, but, in terms of hearing from the source, all we know is that like these two women were like, we're sorry, like 20 years after the fact, and that's it. That's all.
Wow.
So I think that's 3, but
okay.
I'm sure in the middle of the night I'll come up with something. I don't know if they should be at the same dinner party. I think Emily Dickinson and Emily Bronte should definitely be at the same dinner party. Mercy Lewis.
Maybe that's, a one-on-one coffee.
Kind of thing. Yeah, like a bottle of wine and like.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me what you know.
Oh my gosh. I love it. Oh man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
and it gets finished. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's great. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your experience. We really love the book, Skylar.
Good. I'm so glad. Well,
Yeah.
tell me, say hello, and yeah, yeah.